I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Kamasia. Today, International Arrivals welcomes artist Maureen Kapbagan and Jevi Jo Vituk, two Filipino artists who work together as Abang-guard. Their current exhibition at the Queen's Museum reconfigures the iconic architecture of the 1964-1965 New York World Fairs, Philippines, and New York State pavilions as a scaffold to structure their investigation into the layered significance of the year 1965 in Filipino-American labor history. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
We're excited that you're here to chat with us today. So maybe we'll start by having you kind of introduce yourselves and your individual practices before we talk about your collaborative practice.
My name is Maureen Kapbagan, and I'm a multimedia artist, Brooklyn-based, and I do mostly photography and video addressing or centering on queer intimacies, and also peripheral architecture dealing with museums and institutions as almost like a scaffolding. I would call that institutional non-space, which is all the support structures that frame the museum art object, or the center point, which is the doorways, the passageways, the vitrines, all these peripheral elements that are essential in the framing, and it's the physical part of the framing, but is often not considered unless it becomes a problem, much like labor, we'll say. So I started, in terms of my practice, addressing as I'm a museum card and I go through the galleries. Those are the elements that I encounter. And I started thinking about these peripheral structures and peripheral architecture and sort of seeing them as possibilities and portals to the sublime or to other ways of thinking. Kind of like dark matter is this invisible force that holds the universe. Without dark matter, actually, the universe collapses. But one does not see that. And in those ways, I think about the structures of the museum, the support structures.
Such a nice parallel between kind of invisible labor and then these architectural structures, and to think about the way that architecture supports the institution in so many other ways. That's a nice parallel. And Jevi, do you want to talk a little bit about your practice?
Oh yeah, I'm Jevi Jo Vito. So I'm originally from Philippines, and then so I did my grad school in San Francisco way back in 2015. Then I moved here in New York. So all this artists dream to go to New York and doing something. So my first job when I came here was be a museum guard, and then I was thinking like, okay, I have this a day job, and then make my practice after that. But then when I realized, being at work, I'm surrounded with the artworks, like maybe hundreds or millions of artifacts and artworks, and then none of them really represent or even speak to me personally as my, I'm Filipino, Asian American, Southeast Asian, and also I have this indigenous, language in my own hometown. So then I play with that kind of idea. Maybe I can use this, it's a playground, my work, and then use that as a platform for my own narrative and put that in that museum framework. So
Exactly. And so both of the ways that you've talked about it is kind of like an extension of institutional critique, as I understand it, for both of you, thinking about kind of new ways to think through the museum and what it represents and how those structures are so informed by colonial ideas.
And then how did you two meet and start making work together?
We both work at the Metropolitan Museum in the building, and a colleague of ours said, "Oh, you two should meet." And we had a conversation. We're both Filipino, and we had a lot of affinity in terms of labor experience, immigration experience. And we started a dialogue with a practice, starting with performance, which I wasn't regularly doing. It was new to me. I'm usually behind the camera, so I'm a little bit skittish to be in the front. And Jevi actually taught me how to be more comfortable and express myself in performance more.
Mm. That's also interesting when we met at the Metropolitan Museum. I have this friend, Mariah, and then they asked me like, why did you, how did you land as a museum guard? And then I told them like, oh, I'm an artist, a performance artist. I drink urine. That's my performance before. I did a performance, but I didn't know that this person took it seriously. Like, oh, you're an artist. Maybe you have to meet other artists. That's how I met Mao. And then that time I was in the art residency at Queens, Long Island City. They called it like Flux Factory. That's why, oh, maybe we can do a project. And then from that, we did a project as an avant-garde because we make this kind of fun of avant-garde, because we are in the front lines. We always stand in front. So it's literally, but also avant-garde means waiting in Philippines. So it's like a mixed word,
Oh,
For
oh,
Tagalog,
It's
it's Tagalog for
English.
waiting. And so it's this, we are guards in waiting. And so it has this conceptual, like there's a pun, but there's also us sort of being part of the frame, the body, but we also do the critique from within and from lived experience. And that's how we approach the institution and art and also community, because there's a lot of artists in the guard community.
And I was just in LA and there was a show, and unfortunately I don't remember the name of the curator, but who had been a guard in a museum, in a gallery, not a museum, in a gallery for many years. And then they asked him to curate a show. And so he curated a show. And I just think it brings attention to those people who are in the gallery, who are experiencing the work as you are. And like, I even think, one time I was in the AGO, which is in Toronto, and the guard said, oh, do you want me to talk to you about these works? And I thought, yeah, absolutely. Like, you listen to everybody, you look at the work all day, talk about slow looking, I mean, that really brings a whole other level to it. So I think it's very interesting that you're finding ways to ask us to think about those guards in different ways.
Well, the guards are also, in theory, invisible, right?
Yes.
And until you touch something and cross the line and do something wrong, but
yeah, I keep thinking about Fred Wilson's piece too, where he has the guards, the headless guards,
Yeah.
right?
The uniforms.
Exactly, just in their uniforms, where just sort of there's no individuality to it, which you're working against, obviously.
And Maureen, the invisibility of the guard, kind of brings me back to what you were saying about these kind of the interstitial spaces that you're focusing on in your work.
Like you said, that are invisible until you have a problem.
Yes. And also we can play with sight and sight, those two words, and and the dynamics of that within the guard, which is the surveillance aesthetics.
Yes.
We're supposed to watch you, and you're not supposed to see us until there's an issue or you need guidance. We have to be unobtrusive regarding our presence, but yet still surveilling. So we play with those kind of power dynamics.
We were thinking about the idea of like value, what are the stuff that can be, like project or conceive as valuable. And when we think about also culture, they're not just the material culture, but you have these kinds of, like oral traditions, like songs, dance. So that's why we have these kinds of or maybe we can make a imagine museum, like regarding culture that are invisible, that are not typically in a display format. So yeah, we're
Right.
playing with those kinds of ideas.
Like what is held in the museum or held in an archive and what is not. And
Yeah.
this idea of invisibility too, of like what is seen and what is not seen.
But also who decide, like this
Yeah,
is
right.
art and this is like something like an artwork that belongs to natural museum. But this is not really coming from academic perspective, but more of the live experience that we are experiencing, because sometimes we are also guarding events, like all these kinds of patrons and also the not collectors that are, like they're gonna donate artworks. So they have these kinds of evening, collectors evening. So that's why when I realized, oh my God, these are the people who are gonna decide what's gonna be acquisition,
There's this discrepancy of market knowledge where with the collectors and how artwork is deemed valuable, and then how we perceive art as embodied knowledge, as a form of meditation that is mostly outside of currency, and it's more towards thinking and our relation to the body and the art object, which is in constant dialogue because we have a certain job and we have a certain currency in the museum, and the art object has a certain currency which is invaluable. So we think of those relations and how we navigate through them as regarding our art practice and how we have a dialogue with our art practice on that.
And so I'm curious, when you're working as guards, do you ever think about the performative aspects of that? Or do you ever exploit sort of the performative aspects of being a guard in a museum?
Have you broken into song
All but-
spontaneously in
Just-
in the gallery, a tap
Yeah.
dance?
I mean, just standing, like physically there, present, it's already performative. So
It is performative in so many ways. And just,
Yeah.
the uniform and the way that you have to move, or the way that you have to, as you say, not be seen, but it is about surveillance and seeing.
Oh, actually, in one of our residencies, we did a performance together in Aarhus in Denmark. Flux Factory had a residency there, and we were part of the cohort. And we did a performance in a gallery where we actually embodied the inner lives of guards, where we sang, where we were looking like we were taking notes, and we would talk about our notes and do choreography like calisthenics and people weren't sure, are they performing or are they guards, because we actually wore their uniform, the guards in there, and we separated the language slightly because by exposing our Filipino-ness with rolling up the pants and wearing like slippers. Oh, we were actually barefoot in the museum. So it was just that subtle coating, or is not so subtle, the coating on the feet. So if the public doesn't look down, then they would just mistake us as regular guards doing weird stuff. But you look down, you're like, oh, maybe they're performers because they have bare feet in the galleries.
So it's about reading the codes too.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that kind of brings me to your current show at the Queen's Museum, which was covered by Rolling Stone and was just chosen as one of the summer shows to see by Hyperallergic this year. So congratulations. That's impressive.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
great.
Thank you.
It's great, and a lot of people are going to be taking long rides on the 7 train.
But the title is Makibaka. Do you want to correct me on that?
Yes. It's Makibaka.
Makibaka.
Makibaka. And according to the Queen's Museum site, roughly translates from Tagalog, coming together for change. And according to the site, it's a rallying cry by Filipino movements and communities in fighting against exploitive systems. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that concept relates to your work, both present and past or future.
Yeah, Makibaka is a rallying cry. Actually has different phrases too. It's fight to live to fight, dare to struggle, dare to win. It's a slogan that resistance and protest movements had against the Marcos dictatorship and martial law during the 70s and 80s, and has become sort of the regular rallying cry of Filipino activists fighting against oppressive systems, both in Philippines and abroad.
But also interesting about the Makibaka, because we just realized there's no such like a translation in one word. It's a rallying cry, and also like it's more of the urgency of like coming together for a common cause, for a protest.
It's the Filipino American history is a legacy of solidarity and social justice, community care, and labor empowerment. So when he said that, it just resonated. I was like, that's it. And it got reinforced when we watched Nurse Unseen, which we were doing also research, which came out like a year ago, a documentary that's a very powerful documentary on Filipino nurses during COVID.
Okay.
At the end of that one, they also said Makibaka.
So Makibaka,
So in that sense, this word has a power of bringing communities together to stand up for each other in difficult times, which we're having right now.
Exactly. Seems so fitting, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And can I ask you about the word Makibaka for a second? And in Filipino culture. I've been very interested, side project, interested in words that kind of embody a culture, and often there's no translation for them to another language. Would you say that even more than this piece, and kind of, I would say, like you said, sort of the Filipino diaspora, it kind of embodies that here in the US, but how about at home in the Philippines also? Is it have a wider kind of zeitgeist of Filipino culture, this word, or is
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
there another one and it's not the right one?
No, definitely. They use it for protest movements during Duterte, uh, any of the, even currently. It's sort of a powerful word because when Filipinos hear that, they know immediately this is a protest movement, this resistance movement, where this is a word that means we're standing up for each other together. It's kind of an understood meaning of that
Mhm.
word.
It's like when you do a protest, it's not just me or our, let's say our group, our organization, but we're also asking people outside to join us. So that's more the term makibaka.
I keep
So
thinking about this article by Judith Butler about alliances in the street. And so she talks about protest is not about changing whatever it is that you're protesting against. It's actually about body to body alliances. And so
Mhm.
I think that
yeah.
that kind of carries that sense as well from what you're
Mhm.
saying,
Mm-mm.
of like it's bringing people together to know that they have this common thing,
Yeah.
whatever that is, right? And maybe that's more powerful than actually implementing change or, fighting against whatever.
Mm-mm.
That power of bringing people together to stand for something is maybe where the power resides.
Yeah, and it inevitably brings change when you have that. That's why it's dangerous. It's a dangerous thing for people to come together. It's like strength in numbers also, and also it energizes people. Being, as you said, body to body contact, there's a certain energy generated. And systems do topple with people like to say, oh, protests are not as powerful, but they are. That's also kind of a psyops to me, so that people feel discouraged and not to,
And I think
you know.
I think it reinforces the fact that you are not alone. Like
Mhm.
Yeah,
I always think
definitely.
about that you are not alone in
Mhm.
thinking the things you think. And so coming together collectively, there's a certain power in that. And as you probably know too, like when you go to some of these protests, it's really emotional and really
Mhm.
overwhelming to see so many people standing up for what you believe is right, or
There's definitely an emotionality in it.
I-
You can feel it.
absolutely, and that people are standing up.
Mhm.
Whether that's past or whether that's future. I mean, we need to come together and
It's
stand up.
Mhm.
very empowering, I would
It
say.
is. Back to your exhibition.
Yes. Okay. Once you enter the gallery, on the outside is Jevi Jo's paintings, and it refers to the New York State Pavilion, the Theaterama. Outside of the Theaterama in the World's Fair were paintings of modernist artists such as Warhol, Rauschenberg,
Liechtenstein.
Lichtenstein. And so he kind of created an outline of a gray arc for the Theaterama with the paintings of the different versions of the paintings that were on modernist paintings that were on the
Yeah,
pavilion.
but also interesting, like when the 1965, these artists are relatively not known. I mean, they could be famous that time in their community, but in terms of like global or international, so they package them as the American avant-garde artist.
Yeah.
And
So
about American, I mean, there's that whole history of American freedom and individualism that, Pollock represented and then was like presented by the CIA across the
yeah,
globe.
yeah.
I mean, that's another
You want to
history
talk
of,
about soft power?
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, that's a good play with the, oh, they are American avant-garde. Maybe we can play as avant-garde to react with that avant-garde. So yeah, like, so that's why even those works like Warhol, Rosenquist, Liechtenstein, who else? Rauschenberg. So I made those painting that resembles their style, but also how can I retain also my own style? So because I have my own style, like very heavily textured. But then when you see those textured, like brush textured, there resembles indigenous markings in Philippines. So, but again, it's also like hidden, like you cannot see it. But then when you look closely, you can see the texture that are,
Yeah, I really noticed it on the image of the nurses, like the textures on the face. That
yeah.
was really strong for me.
And then when you go into the gallery, you see the centerpiece, which is the time capsule, 75 time capsules creating the farmer's hat with a trail of suits and dresses. And on the side, you see the 7 screen, sort of triangular, upside down, inverted monument shape videos. And right next to it is the grid of paintings that continues from the outer walls to another gray curve, representing sort of the Warhol version that Jevi painted of the 13 Most Wanted, but it was 13 Most Help Wanted, which is the nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the far end is the digital counters for the air we breathe for Donna Ballon. And we can talk about this specifically the central sculpture, which is time capsules for the Manong Manongs. It deals with the 1965 Delano rape strike, which is one of the layers that we wanted to unpack in a Filipino American history. Mostly, the Delano grape strike is associated with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely is Larry Itliong mentioned in that. And even Filipinos weren't aware. Like a lot of Filipinos that come there, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know this was our history." I was just like, "Yes, he started it. Actually, Larry Itliong." We can backtrack to why the Delano grape strike happened. It was the history of the Filipino labor diaspora came in 2 waves, like the Manong generation, which is the young migrant workers that moved from farm to farm. They were extracted from the Philippines with a lot of promise that, oh, you can pick up gold from the street, you can be rich in the United States. And then they're dropped into sugar plantations, Alaskan canneries as just workers, and had laws that prevented them from marrying and having families because they needed these men to migrate and travel with the crops. So they had a lot of exploitive, oppressive systems against them. They couldn't own anything.
So the concept of the Queen's Museum was to commemorate the 1965 World's Fair. In 1965, the Philippine Pavilion, and then what are the pavilions? The Southeast
Pakistani
Asian,
pav-
Pakistan, like that. But then when you think about the US, it's not even like a US pavilion. It's like all these major corporations, like even Disney
Right.
was there, and then even Westinghouse, and then you have this New York State Pavilion. And then when we were researching the Philippine Pavilion, the design was based on the hat because also in
the
1965 farmer's hats, they call it salakot, but also because the theme is all about space age 1965, but then they just use the vernacular version of a space age, like because the salakot is shaped like a spaceship. So that's just the logic. And then when you go to the inside, there are wood carvings, but talks about Filipino history, like from like Magellan, like discover the Philippines, and then from the Filipino and American, they are joined together against the Japanese. But then also when we were thinking about it, like where's also wait, this is the history of Filipino, but also where's the Filipino Americans, So there's also missing in that narrative. So that's why we focus, or maybe we can focus on, like Filipino American history, and then what happened in 1965, that major, and then we discovered like 1965 was the biggest Delano Manong protest in California, but also 1965 was the Immigration Act, which gave way to nurses to come in the U.S. to be a U.S. citizen, because that time, you cannot bring your family here, and also, those kinds of interesting topics, and then we can use those frameworks of museum or institutional to make it more. I call it like relatable.
Mhm.
Let's say I'm not Filipino, I'm Filipino American, but then when you use those kinds of formats, like they are familiar with, like pop art, like Andy Warhol, now we can have a conversation. So those kinds of we call it like avant-garde strategies.
Yeah, like the 1964-65 World's Fair was unofficial. It wasn't condoned by the committee, the official World's Committee. That's why Robert Moses couldn't showcase Spain or any of the Europeans, Germany and Canada, all the big countries. So he asked the other countries, the new countries, the Pakistan, Philippines, and other peripheral countries, invited them to have a pavilion, or else Philippines would not have a pavilion. And also, since he was kind of short with those countries, he asked the corporations, and that's why the 64-65 World's Fair had a lot of corporations with it, IBM, Johnson & Johnson. So a lot of pavilions were, and also Disneyland had its debut of It's a Small World, the animatronics, in the 64-65 World's Fair. And how we view this sort of site response or response to the archive, because the Queen's Museum is part of the site archive of the World's Fair. Corona Park is the location of the World's Fair with the Unisphere that you see in the globe outside of Queen's Museum. And Queen's Museum is the New York City Pavilion, and it has the panorama. They asked us to contend with the archives that they're part of and in their history. So we saw the Philippine Pavilion as an entry point to labor because of the farmer's hat roof. I was like, that's our entry point to talk about Filipino labor diaspora, the back end through the front end, as we would say.
Right.
And so we were excited to be able to do that and present that format, to reconfigure the pavilion not as this entertainment aesthetic, but also like open it up to the history of Filipinos in the nation building of the United States.
And I think this is the thing that I think is super important in terms of narratives. Like what you're doing in bringing these archives out into visibility, let's say, is you're really disrupting this official narrative of America and this official narrative of, global America in a corporate world. And I think it must have a real impact on the Filipino community. As you said, a lot of Filipinos don't know these histories. They don't know about the strike. You called it
The Delano grape strike.
Well, we don't know about that on the East Coast either.
No.
Like it's not sort of being an East Coaster. I then moved to California for a while, and then it was Cesar Chavez Day, and I was like, "What is this day?" Farm worker history was something that wasn't part of what was spoken about every day. So, and I find that definitely, in our work in the podcast here, we find that people in different parts of the U.S., are more familiar with different immigrant groups, based on where they settled
Which
and their
makes sense.
issues, which of course makes sense.
Yeah, and this was a very, very important solidarity movement. I'm going to say, if you want to talk about Makibaka and coalitions, this is a 5-year strike. This is a long-going strike to boycott grapes because it was for wages and also for the manongs who were the migrant workers. They were aging, they were unhoused, they had no family, so they fought for a retirement home, which is Agbayani Village, where is now the Cesar Chavez Foundation.
Right.
But Agbayani Village was named after Paulo Agbayani, which is a Filipino striker during that strike who died of a heart attack in the hot sun. And they wanted to name the retirement village, Agbayani Village, in commemoration of him, in memory of him. So there's a lot of Filipino elements here. This is a coalition of Filipino and American migrant workers and farmers. It was the largest movement, and it was successful. It was 5 years that
It's a long time.
Yeah, imagine a 5-year protest.
Yeah.
You can't even imagine. And you say, oh, how is that even possible? It was a good timing in terms of civil rights movement was going on, so it gained more traction. But they had a headquarters, which we highlighted the Filipino Center, which is part of the video piece that is the bridge monument, which is an inverted monument of screens and different important Filipino sites historically. And they fed each other mutual aid, and during the strikes, they even housed each other in that center when they were kicked out of the farms because, oh, you're not working, then you don't belong here. And during the strikes, because you had to feed your family, you can't strike forever.
Right.
So they would do the boycotts. in between the strike in order to keep the pressure. And all of that requires a lot of organizing and a lot of supporting each other. And the reason that Larry Itliong approached Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta is like, we can't scab each other anymore. Like one person strikes and then they take us in. And then when you strike, we have to work together. It's now or never. And that's the advent of the Delano grape strike. And so the time capsule is kind of like this memorial for them, which is 75 time capsules shaped like a salakot hat, a farmer's hat, but it also looks like a UFO, as in Men in Black. It was as a reference, if you want to talk about a pop reference in Corona Park.
But also, I just want to add about the inspiration behind that salakot. If you see it, right, it has this kind. It look like a metallic because it's also based on it's crazy because it's based on the IBM, like the
Westinghouse time capsule.
So it's looked like a missile, like a international ballistic missile. And then when we're thinking about right now, what's happening now in the Middle East, all these kinds of ballistic missiles, like all these kinds of war. So
and it comes at a moment where we were embracing the space age, right? Embracing this idea of like
of progress, of the future,
exactly.
that modern technology could make our lives so much better.
It's a form of armored resistance to this kind of militaristic, but also it talks about time, because in the time capsules, first of all, it comprises of 75 time capsules bearing the names of the strikers and the organizers, and inside are kind of gifts, like ancestor gifts from us, like in the present, are gifts to them from the Little Manila that, because of them, exist now. So it's little Filipino products that we put in there as offerings. So this giant reliquary of offerings to our ancestors in a futuristic format of a time capsule. So it layers time beautifully that way.
And I mean, what's great for the audience is that you get to see parts of that time capsule and you can look at the different products. Because I was thinking about labor, obviously, because that's what you highlight in the show. I was thinking about like where these products came from, who made them, where were they made, were they tariffed when they came into America?
Yeah.
We made that just in time before the tariffs came.
Yeah, we source out it from Little Manila, like groceries, delis. But also, I was thinking more about the influencing Philippines, like the idea of they call it the benevolent assimilation, when they were educating Filipinos, teaching English and also teaching them, about Hollywood, Disneyland. So I mean, that's why all of the maybe in general, mostly immigrants came to United States because of the idea of American dream, that once you come here, everything is like we have all equal opportunity. And then we realize even these manongs, when they came here, they're actually engineers, educators, teachers. But then when they came here, they also became farmers. It's the same now when we are experiencing wait, we have master's degree. I have 2 master's degree. Like in studio arts and media technology. But then if you want to get involved with the art scene, art world, systemic racism within institution, but then you realize museum is actually not neutral. So okay, it's like maybe we can reverse that using, if there's a soft power, then we can have a soft resistance. That's why it's like the idea of all these projects, it just came organically. Because there's sometimes I don't know, there's a stigma, right? If you're a person of color, you have to have this topic, but then where's that coming from? And sometimes this is like a CNN or encyclopedic, like people already know. But then if you talk coming from your experience.
Yes.
And then you can speak more in those nuances that are more important, and then they're really coming from your, from your core.
And I think that's really important, actually. I think the nuances are what are important to capture, because you don't want to be lumped, immigrants. We're all immigrants here, but I think there's certain nuances from where you're coming from and how you're interacting with the world, and your class. All of those things are part of the nuances, right?
I love this idea of soft resistance, and perhaps there could be an argument made that it might even be more effective than full-on resistance in a lot of ways. And I say that by, I think that influencing people in terms of their wants and their longing and their dreams and their personal relationships and their conversations, I believe that's how you change people's minds. Which is a revolution of sorts, soft revolution.
I guess there's also like a lot of ways of making resistance, but when we did this project, like how can we, I'm not the word penetrate, like how can we, like in the belly of the beast, right? Infiltrate, like that.
Or actually assert ourselves, assert our narratives within the frame, because we are part of the frame, but we are not allowed access to the narrative, we'll say, in certain spaces. But we were provided a space, in an institutional space, to have that platform. And what we talk about in soft resistance, we wanted to talk about other possibilities of conceptualizing monuments, and even questioning what is a monument, because there's a Western idea of a monument, which really had pushback during the Black Lives Movement.
Exactly. And
so we're talking about monuments could be offerings and reliquaries and ways of pilgrimage, and also the way the structure of the monument is like this sort of pinnacle. When you invert that, what does that mean? Which we did in Bridged Monuments, which talks about the bridge generation, and inverted the monument format to go the other way.
Just for our audience, with seven screens, is it?
Yes, seven screens,
channel video.
7 channels that show footage of bridges and also important sites intermittently that open up, which is the erased Little Manila, which is the original Little Manila that the Manongs were in, that has basically erased. And not a lot of Filipinos know about it unless you really look for it in terms of the archives. And
the monitors are they go from big to small, bigger at the top and smaller at the bottom. They're stacked on top of each other.
Yes, instead of the other way around in a monument. And it also resembles a bridge trestle because of the other pivot point that we talk about mid-1960s is urban redevelopment and the erasure of Stockton, Little Manila by putting this giant crosstown freeway, removing all its history to the point that basically only 3 buildings are left. These are the ones that are left that the crosstown freeway didn't decimate. And circling back to that is Robert Moses, who's the founder and director of the 1964-65 World's Fair. He was also the architect of the crosstown, the BQE.
He's a hated figure here in New York.
He's a complicated figure, I would say.
He's a controversial figure.
Yes, and he was part of the BQE and the Cross Bronx Expressway. So there's these mirrorings of wanting to sort of, like, there's redlining and there's also, I would say, concrete lining in terms of unwanted POC neighborhoods, kind of a way to remove them by putting these freeways or expressways through them.
Yeah.
Also causing health effects, long-term health effects, which is another piece that we did of Dr. Dawn Mabalan, who was also an important historian for us in terms of she preserved Little Manila, Stockton's history through her book, Little Manila is in the Heart. And she died of asthma at 45 because she grew up in Stockton. And so that history was in her body and the effects of that kind of treatment that we wanted to highlight in terms of AQI and PM2, that we juxtaposed the Flushing site and also the Stockton site. And we would monitor the monthly average of that as a way of talking about these histories of, also that area is surrounded by freeways.
What's the name of that piece?
The Air We Breathe.
The Air We Breathe, and it shows
It's 4 digital counters, and one set for Stockton, one set for Flushing, Queens, where the museum is, the space, and it's a monthly average of the AQI and the PM 2.5, which AQI is Air Quality Index. Anything over 100, you would get warnings like the California fires that wafted here in 2023, and there was some of the New Jersey fires, you get that warning that the air quality is not good. And PM2.5 is the particulate matter that can launch into the lungs, causing respiratory and cardiovascular issues. And it was weird when I was doing the average of those numbers that they kept twinning.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It
when we were
was
there, yeah.
weird. 2 or 3 times, like the third time, it was off by 1, but they were twinning for 3 months in a row. And I was just like, this is a little bit kind of symbolic.
Absolutely.
I just want to talk about the Andy Warhol piece because it was the title Andy Warhol Most Wanted.
Yes.
So they put that in the 1965 New York State Pavilion. But then after a few days, they have to remove it because they put the Most Wanted in which the mayor doesn't want that because it's like it represents all these wanted Americans.
Right.
The
So-
outlaws.
So the
Right.
next day, I guess a few days, they just put like a tarp, like a black cloth. So
Over it.
it didn't really what we call that one. It never been exhibited publicly that piece. So it just in the
It was
documentation.
exhibited, but they covered it.
They covered
They
it.
censored it.
They
Yeah, they
censored
censored it.
Yes.
But yeah, but also it's funny because I make it more like a pun about the idea of like like Barry Duchamp, like how can I make fun of the work, but it's also very also endearing, like the idea of like putting the nurses, but they're not wanted, but they're help wanted, which is the idea of like in demand, like during the 1965, they were, like a flux of, demand nurses going to US.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
clever. I think that's really clever to think about
uh,
that.
And also it has that kind of surveillance look, with the passports identifying face, but there's a
Mm-mm.
resistance to that knowability with his indigenous marks that would sort of make the face more geometric. So we'll say AI surveillance can't really read that when you do have those certain masks, geometric masks. So there's kind of this play of legibility and illegibility. And within this pop format is also, these are all homages of this insistence of the Filipino narrative, even within modernism, which is never even, you can't even conceptualize that within modernist art, Filipino, history. So that kind of insistence of our faces and our bodies, our representations, our histories within the modern vernacular, we'll say, is a way of confronting there's not just a linearity to archives, a linearity to aesthetics that is mostly Western. There's this value of, there's also layers behind it and other archives, like community archives, which we actually didn't know. This was a learning part for us too. We didn't know our own history. This project helped us sort of uncover it through community archives, through talking and interviews with the Bridge Generation and FONS and La Manila, all the Filipino organizations that chose to preserve Filipino legacies in multiple ways, social justice wise, lineage wise, in many formats. So we learned how to contend with the archive in these multi-layers and multi-formats and multi-possibilities, which was very humbling and enriching and inspiring.
And I also like how you've incorporated the archive. I think I was saying this when you came in, but it really resonated with me, the way that you're creating new archives from these other archives. And so whether it's deliberate or not, there's this through line of archives. So it speaks to your work in the archive. It speaks to the communities that have archived all of this information. It speaks to longer generations and histories, and speaks in some ways to the museum and the lack of those.
Connecting archives, because their intention was community. So like, okay, community outreach, then we'll bring the community archives here and connect it and make it more root-like, not just this one sort of factual, linear narrative. It's really a rhizome, a root, and it spreads and it's multi-layered, and it should be considered that way. That's how you create multi-values, not just one sort of overarching, this is the epitome of things.
But even archiving is very difficult. It's also the idea of like, it's also the same concept of a museum collection, like who decide what are, being archived and what's in the archive. Like, remember when we went to the Queen's Museum archive of the Salakot Philippine Pavilion? There's even none. It's just like what, like a scarf and a catalog,
Yeah.
because that's where
There was a
on the
postcard
file.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's these different ephemera, and you have an incomplete picture when you're just seeing the 64-65 World's Fair as this sort of entertainment landscape.
Yes.
A lot is lost. Even within the pavilions, there's certain ways they present themselves, but then there's the back end. Who built those pavilions, and what is their story?
But like you were saying earlier, you mentioned, Jevi, you mentioned the body and like song and ritual and all of those things. And I think it's interesting the way that you've brought the body into the work as well, whether it's the suggestion of the bodies through the clothing, but or your own bodies in the video, And so I think that that's something that obviously is not contained within an archive, are those actual feeling effective bodies. And so I think that's you've done a nice job of integrating the bodies back into thinking about the archive and whose bodies and where are those bodies and how those stories get shared, told, retold.
Yeah, because the bodies exist there, but then there's also an absent of the physical body. You have the form of it, and it has that. It infers that the body was there, but then it's absent. So this in between state that gives it a resonance. And I put those there in terms of to represent the Manongs and the Manongs, and they had suits and their Sunday best, because that was actually the only time, and they had community hall dances and taxi dance halls. And that was the time that they actually got to enjoy themselves and feel luxurious, because they didn't have access to that 6 days out of the week. They were in the farms, in the heat. We were trying to interview the children of the bridge generation in the actual heat in our uniforms. And in 5 minutes, we were already sweating. And we were like, how did you do it? Because the children also work there all day in this sun. Our electronics were melting, malfunctioning, and we're just like, oh, it's fine. We did this. We got used to it. I'm just like, oh my God.
Yes, the actuality of the realities of working on a farm on the body, right?
It is difficult.
Yeah.
And we weren't even working. We were just standing there and we were sweating. Imagine working. And so there's a lot of this kind of embodied knowledge that's lost in terms of experience, and the archive too. So even just bringing the inference of that, I think, is important.
And that also connects, I think, to so many other groups, not just Filipino groups, but think about how many people came here and worked as farmers or were, enslaved and had to work on farms. And so I think that resonates a lot, I believe, with other groups, not just Filipino groups.
Yeah, that's why this one is more of a, it's just like a springboard to other conversation, like larger issues, like we talk about, like working class, people of color,
Yes.
like, like POC, but also, because when I was thinking about the body, like the idea of like, when you think about a body, like sometimes they're asking me, like, are you political? But then I was thinking like, my body's already political. The mere fact that you're already in this, this space, it makes you question why even that person is here. Because I was thinking now about the African American dandy show in the Met Museum
Super
right
fine.
now. Super fine. So when I was thinking like, when the Manongs, where they're well dressed, they're dancing, and then sometimes like, oh, they're farmers. Why they have, why they have to have that kind of suit, or feeling good. So my point is like, sometimes, like, you have to, like, cross those boundaries or thresholds. And then sometimes you don't have to make a verbal statement just to be there. Like us guards, right? It's crazy, right? When we are in the museum, we work as a guard. It's like, okay, like we're invisible. And then the next month, we're the one in the Queen's Gala, and we're being celebrated as the artist. And then you meet this person, the curator, oh, congrats. And then you meet in the other one, like, okay, they were treating us like you
It's
know
180
Maybe
degrees.
like
you'll never
peasants.
want to give up your day job, you know. I can't
Yeah.
imagine that.
But
And-
it's sorry.
And dress is a resistance, you know, in
Mhm.
Superfine, that was presented as dress as resistance for the Black body to insist that, you know,
They take
we
space.
belong
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
that we can
Mhm.
take space and we can take space regally. And so the Filipinos, too, by dressing up, um, has that kind of resistance. We talk about soft resistance, soft power. This aesthetic of refinement is
Mhm.
that I belong here too. In a way, it's a way of showing power, even if it's soft power.
And it resonates too with this idea of the bridge or the threshold you talked about. And I think, like, you talked about the body as being both present and absent. And so it's like it's crossing these boundaries, right? And I think that the dress does that, but also you talk about presence and absence, and that does that. And I think moving from one space or one site to another also does that in different ways. So like it's conceptually, I think it's really strong in your work that it's these thresholds, a bridge, a threshold, a boundary, whatever you want to call that. It resonates in a lot of the work.
Yes, and we're talking about moving the frame as the frame as the boundary. So, in terms of what's in the frame, what's out the frame, what's possible, was in the frame that one didn't notice. So it's the boundary, yes, of pushing what is possible and what can be seen, who of witness, what is witnessing and what can be witnessed. Also, our history is being witnessed.
Yes.
You know, as a way, a site as a form of privilege. So being able to present that to show not only our community, their history, of which they were like, wow, we didn't know how rich our history was, and to give them a form of, oh, we have a way of empowering ourselves. This is the model. You know, this is a model not only for Filipinos, because that form of resistance was a solidarity movement. So it was Filipinos and Mexicans. So it was a POC sort of coalition. So that is to show that object, and that monument says it is possible. And it's possible to win. Even if it takes 5 years, we're going to stand together and we're going to win.
And it opens the door to thinking about other protests that happen. Like, I know in California, there were Mexican protests that, go unspoken about. And yet they were huge in terms of like against the Vietnam War or the
Even
workers.
now.
Yeah, exactly. Even now. Yes.
Which is important.
So it was, I say like a conversation or maybe 2 conversations ago. Somebody mentioned your personal story fitting into the archive. That's where it happened in the conversation. And now we have to ask you the question that we ask all of our podcast guests is if you could tell us a little bit about, now you're here in New York in the US, and how you each personally got here and with your family or by yourself or became part of the diaspora.
You can go for it.
Me, like yeah, so I was already active in Philippines as an artist, and then yeah, when I did my master's degree in San Francisco, I was just challenged about like the idea of like coming to New York, the idea of like like the how can you be part of the larger conversation of like the history of art. I'm not the one on my like family, like immediate family in Philippines that came here. So it's like I'm the first generation
Mm-hmm.
from my family. So it's like it's really hard, but then it's also like the challenges that when you discover all these artists. Like even when I read the book, I was even shocked. Like I read this book of America's in the Heart by Carlos Bolosan, and this was written in during what, like during the Great Depression. But then it's like, man, this is my life. Like the idea of like you can relate, and then the idea of like, yeah, like the idea of like yeah, that Makibaka thing. It's like it's when we see those people right in pictures, like those farmers, manongs, like as if they already, their history has been done, and that's it. They're already part of the archive. But then when I was thinking about my experience, the experience is not even that different. And then I feel like my story is not even special. Like though when you think about all these artists who came before me, like even
Mhm.
poets, artists. But then, yeah, like that's why I like the term avant-garde, because the avant-garde means the idea of like pushing boundaries.
That's right.
Mhm.
The first, like
The
from the
first in
military,
the
the
front
first
line.
sent out. Yeah.
But also, yeah, like when you ask me these questions, like also it's like, yeah, like what we're doing, there's no blueprint. Like, like when I was thinking about, even we're talking like, is there like we have these artists like guards, like before, like even Jackson Pollock and Robert Raymond, who work as a guard at the MoMA, but then they never really talk about the life of being a guard, or even, yeah, like there's some like a Fred Wilson critique, like if you're there, your body's there, you're living in it, and then like today you work, and then we're in podcast as an artist now, and then tomorrow we're gonna be at Queen's Museum to have a workshop, and then the next day we're gonna be at the
Standing regularly,
regularly
gallery.
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
Touch
So
that.
In your uniform.
in
In
a
a uniform
uniform.
with different ways.
But I
of-
mean, to a certain level, I think that's a lot of people. Like
Mhm.
that we take on these. We've talked about that before. That we take on these roles, and that your role is constantly shifting. It's not about identity, but it is about identities. We're constantly in relation to other things that are happening in our life. But I think it is, the way that you have used the position of guard to disrupt other narratives, structures, racial constructions. I think that's the interesting part, is how you've engaged that.
the internal critique
Yes.
within the
Yes.
institution, and also sort of this embodied way of seeing art objects and experiencing art objects, and being able to translate that to the audience, this kind of lived experience
Mhm.
of knowledge. A lot of Filipinos are OFWs, which is overseas Filipino
Worker.
workers.
Mhm.
That is one of our largest exports, are our labor. U.S. has extracted two large diasporas of that, which is the farm workers and the nurses. And so my mom's in the medical field. She didn't directly go to the U.S. first. She actually took different sort of jobs in different nations. So I grew up everywhere in that sense, not just in Philippines, but in Sri Lanka, in Nigeria, and other places.
wow.
So my childhood was kind of transitory. And then she remarried and settled in Ohio. I went upstate in Buffalo to state school, and then ended up in New York, because this is where the artists are, in terms of how, like, in terms of breaking in. And because I went to art school in Binghamton, or majored in art, and you negotiate through different forms of entryways, right? I did art admin. I wasn't doing my practice because it's a different experience, and so I wanted that space as a guard to have that headspace, and sort of to think about my practice, and to have time with my practice. And actually, that's the one good thing. This is the unexpected experience of time that guards have, is to be
Mhm.
able to conceptualize their practice and have the artwork. It's almost like a residency in that way. You're with the art objects. So in those ways, I find my job sort of a blessing. It's field work,
Yes.
right? It's field work, like we talked about field work with the archives. We're doing field work with our bodies as guards, and reading the labels and experiencing it in slow time.
Yes.
So these are different ways of gaining knowledge, and that is outside of the economic currencies. And having that other option of dialogue, or experience of dialogue, I think is an important way of creating more nuance for the audience to experience.
And even nuance for yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Of just your own understanding of situating yourself in relation to the museum, the work, your history, the history, Filipino history, which is your history, but not directly. And I think that allows you that space too. Thank you. Thank you both so much for coming to talk with us. It's been really fruitful and just really fascinating to listen to you talk about your work. So thank you.
It's excellent. Any
Thank you, too.
plans in the future after the Queen's Museum show? What's happening next?
I have a show at Flux, and Jevi and I will continue to think about transnational histories within the Little Manilas, because we're having this is part of an overall project, long-term project of Museum of Little Manilas, where we go to different, say first is the United States and learning the bicoastal, like there's a lot of Little Manilas and have their own history and sort of community connections. And since we're OFWs, or most Filipinos are OFWs, there's other Little Manilas in other nations in Europe and other ways that they engage with their environment and the politics within which they are in. So we're interested in exploring those ways.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It was great to have you discuss your work. If you want to see more work of Abang-guard, you can go to the Instagram of Abang-guard, or you can go to maureenkatbagan.com. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take a moment to hit the like button, rate us, and review the show. It makes a big difference in helping us reach more listeners.
Your tax-deductible donations make this podcast possible. Please support us at internationalarrivals.org.